Welcome. This is March the 30th, 2025. I recently did a video with Dr. Richard Carrier on the likelihood that Jesus never existed, and also ones with Pete Papa Heracles on that theme, also that the Old Testament patriarchs likely never existed at all. So now I'm going to talk about God not existing. So I have with me here Pannobhasa, who lives in South Carolina. He was a Buddhist monk for 30 years. So let's talk about God not existing, Pannobhasa. Good to have you back.
Yeah, good to be here. God, yes, that would be capital G God, I suppose.
Yeah, we have Devas, a small g God, Devas, but we're talking about the idea of God is just one personal God for the entire universe, and we now know there's about 3 trillion galaxies. So one personal God in this whole universe. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, Buddhism is one of the few world religions that really is considered to be atheistic, or at least it doesn't believe in a capital G, like number one God. And I mean, it comes from one of the origins of Buddhism and just sort of northern Indian religious systems in general that aren't Vedic. You know, the Vedic pre-Hindus, they really didn't believe in a capital G God either. They were just polytheists. You know, there were lots of gods. And then the spiritual system that was apparently already like prospering in northern India when the Indo-Aryans invaded, it was just sort of an atheistic system. You know, they believed in dharma, or as sort of like this universal law that even the gods have to obey, and the gods don't live forever. You know, they're not sending us to heaven or hell. They're not creating the universe, anything like that. It's just they're higher up on the scale than we are. So, in like Buddhism and Jainism are like the two major religions, I think, that don't have like the capital G God.
Oh, tell me about the Jains. I didn't know they didn't have the capital G.
No, I mean it's similar to Buddhism. It's this, they have like a similar kind of cosmology. Also, I guess Taoists, like in China, you got the Taoists, which I mean, some people theorize that Taoism is just sort of like a garbled version of Buddhism. That Lao Tzu was originally just like a garbled version of Gautama Buddha. But Taoism also, it starts off with the Tao, or the way. You know, that's like the ultimate principle. And I mean, when you get into more advanced, like what's the word, mystical, like spiritual systems, that I mean, you get, the God becomes less and less like an angry old man or like Santa Claus, and just becomes more and more abstract. Even in like Roman Catholic theology, that if you're studying about God at some seminary school, it's just an abstraction. It's not the big man sitting on the throne with the angels worshiping him. It just starts becoming like total philosophical abstraction.
Oh, I didn't know that Catholics are like that.
Yeah. So it's like, whether there's a God or not, I mean, it's, you have to have like a definition of God. And if it's just God is reality, God is the highest truth, just by default, no matter what the highest truth is, then there would have to be a God, assuming that there's a highest reality, like an absolute. But in Buddhism, they just didn't go with the idea of God, which is sort of like a personification. You know, like, but then like one step away from Buddhism, you know, towards theology, you've got sort of like the Vedanta idea, the Upanishadic idea, where you've got Brahma is sort of like the personification of ultimate reality, kind of. He's sort of like the capital G God. But then you've got the more philosophical, abstract Brahman, which is like neuter gender. You know, it's neither male nor female. It's just ultimate reality. And sometimes the Vedantists will even take it like one step further and call it Nirguna Brahman, which means ultimate reality, which has no perceptible qualities. You know, it's just completely off the scale. And they say that it exists, but it's so completely off the scale, so completely beyond our comprehension, that you can't even say anything about it. So Buddhism is like one step beyond that, where in Buddhism, because the Buddha really did not encourage philosophical speculation or like theories about the nature of reality. I mean, you're just supposed to experience it directly, because you're never going to understand reality intellectually by thinking about it. I mean, he just completely discouraged any kind of reification of the absolute, like the highest truth, highest reality, ultimate reality. Instead of calling it an it and like trying to describe it like most other religions will do, he just don't even go there. Just practice and you'll experience it directly, and then you'll know, instead of just formulating these theories which can't even touch it really. So the closest you're going to get to like a theist who believes in a capital G God is really just this far away from Buddhism. It's just that in Buddhism, they don't call it God. There's like the absolute, there's Nibbana or Nirvana or Nibbana Dhatu, or some of the Mahayana Buddhists will talk about like the Dharmakaya or something, which is like this ultimate reality which pervades the entire universe, except it's the Buddhists are more sophisticated in their philosophy, so it's just completely off the scale. You can't say that it exists or doesn't exist. Like existence and non-existence is just a kind of mental duality that it's just like a psychological phenomenon, and that the ultimate reality is just completely beyond both existence and non-existence. Like there's a sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, the Lokayataka Sutta. I mentioned it in my most recent Q&A, which is probably going to go up today after we're done talking, where there's this worldly philosopher comes to the Buddha and says, is the universe real? Does it exist? And the Buddha says that the world exists. That is the first theory of the world, the first philosophy of the world. And then the philosopher says, well, then, Sir Gautama, does the world not exist? And the Buddha says, the world doesn't exist. That is the second philosophy of the world. And then a little later, he says, but I mean, he follows the middle path between these extremes. The world exists is one extreme. The world doesn't exist is another extreme. And Buddhism follows this middle path where you don't cling to either extreme. And most like intellectual type people, they just can't wrap their head around that at all. They just don't get it.
I can't wrap my head around it. Can't being in between.
Yeah. So it's like God or the highest truth. I mean, you can't say that it exists or that it doesn't exist. Anything that you say about it is going to be invalid because it's completely off the scale. So Buddhism doesn't even go there. What Buddhism is all about is understanding suffering and the end of suffering. And then that's it. I mean, you don't need to like philosophize or speculate about the nature of reality, because you're never going to understand it until you have become enlightened and you just experience it directly. But then like Taoism also, they have this idea that the Tao is, the absolute, from the Tao came, from the Tao came the one, from the one came the two, and from the two came the 10,000 things. So you start off with reality, and then you got like an unenlightened mind kind of gets this idea of reality, which is different from reality. Like anyone's idea about reality is going to be like infinitely different from actual reality, because it's just like symbols, mental symbols. And then from that's the one. And then from the one, you get sort of duality. You get the idea of is and isn't, this and not this. And then once you get duality, once you start splitting things into more than one, then it just diversifies out into the entire universe of, in Taoism, it's called the 10,000 things. But then, I mean, obviously, like monotheistic religions, they personify God even more than the Hindus do, or at least the Vedantists, the philosophical Hindus. You've got like, I mean, at its crudest level, you just got the angry old man who's like Santa Claus, except he wears a white suit instead of a red suit, and he's got angels for helpers instead of elves, and he's not nearly so jolly. But I mean, the Jehovah's Witnesses maybe kind of still believe that sort of thing. It's sort of like the kind of God that is found in the Old Testament. But gradually, as people get more sophisticated, more civilized, their concept of God gets more sophisticated and more civilized, until finally God just kind of fades out, because you can't really say anything about God and have it be valid. So, I mean, in a way, Buddhism isn't really atheistic. I mean, the philosophy doesn't include God, but that's partly because the highest truth or the ultimate reality is so off the scale, you can't really say anything about it.
Yeah, I
You
guess
can't
I'm
even say
thinking
that
of
it exists or doesn't exist.
a lot of Christians, though, they believe in judgment, like God. They place a lot of importance on like Jesus Christ will save their soul and they'll go to heaven if they believe in Jesus and that atones for the sin. So they have this belief in judgment taking them to heaven or hell. So that's, I think, a big difference with Buddhism. We don't have the idea. Like I recently made a video, how fast does God judge souls? And it was showing the absurdity of a personal God in 3 trillion galaxies every second. He's got to judge trillions of beings. You go to heaven, you go to hell, you go to purgatory, and I'll come back later and decide whether you go to heaven or heaven. You're heaven, 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 hell. So the absurdity of that idea of a personal God, I think a lot of
Yeah, there's
Christians still
probably an
believe.
infinite number, not just 3 trillion. Ultimately, there's probably an infinite number of possible worlds. They're all equally real or unreal.
Well, I'm just saying, current astronomy, I think they count about 3 trillion galaxies, which is pretty
Yeah.
big.
Well, I mean, he's got to make sure that all the snowflakes are different too, but he probably like delegates that to an angel. You got some angel in charge of making sure that no 2 snowflakes are exactly the same, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I
But in
guess
Buddhism,
a
it's
lot
like
of
it's
reviewers.
in Buddhism, it's like no God sends you to heaven, no God sends you to hell. You send yourself there through your own karma, which is mainly
Yeah.
through your own attitude, really. You got a
I think a
hellish
lot of,
attitude, you can go to hell. You got a heavenly attitude, you can go to heaven. You got a human attitude, which most humans have, then you just get reborn as a human again.
yeah, that's my view too, which is a Buddhist view. I think on BitChute, I got a lot of political videos. So like yours are mainly, of course, Buddhist videos, but I have a lot of Christians on BitChute. A lot of them believe in this personal God and they leave comments, Brian, you got to believe in Jesus, So I guess I'm sort of aiming this at my BitChute audience, that the absurdity of having this personal God idea, it just does, it's not logical. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, there's just a whole spectrum from just the ridiculous to the sublime, where you got like the angry Santa Claus in the white suit instead of the red one at one
Yeah.
end, and then you've got like the Brahman, like Nirguna Brahman in like Vedantic Hinduism, where they're calling it God, but still it's so completely off the scale. It might as well be like the Buddhist Nirvana, where you can't say anything about it. It's just it's beyond even exists and doesn't exist, is and isn't. It's just completely off the scale. And so
Maybe
once you get to that level, Buddhism really isn't that far away from that. It might be like one step beyond the highest conception, the most subtle, sophisticated idea about capital G God.
Talk a bit more about, say, the Roman Catholics having a more abstract idea of God. I didn't know about that in Catholicism.
Yeah, it just gets more and more philosophical. Like in the Bible, it's like God gets pissed off. He wants this, he likes this, and doesn't like that. In the Old Testament, he even wants animal sacrifices and gets so pissed off he tries to kill off the human race, except for Noah. And it's just like a man. It's like polytheistic, like paganism, that's just they just anthropomorphize God and turn him into something that some barbarian in ancient times can understand as some higher being, which is mainly just like some king with superpowers. It's like God, Yahweh, Jehovah in the Old Testament is just like some sort of dictator with superpowers. He's just way stronger than us. And it's really the book of Job, which was kind of a turning point in the evolution of God in the Old Testament, where in the book of Job, God's letting Satan do all this horrible stuff to Job. And then at the end, Job is complaining about it. And God essentially says, look, I'm bigger and stronger than you are, and I can do whatever I want to you. And that was like the philosophy of the Old Testament. It's like God you don't question God, you got to kiss his ass. It's kind of the Quran is that way too. In the name of Allah, the benevolent, the merciful, even though he's going to be sending almost everybody in the world to hell. And they don't even have any choice. Like in Islam, there is no free will. Only God has free will. God is all powerful. He's omnipotent. And so all decisions are made by God. So if you believe in Islam, that's because Allah wants you to believe in Islam. If you don't believe in Islam, it's because Allah doesn't want you to believe in Islam, because He's controlling everything. And then He's still going to send you to hell forever and ever for not being a Muslim, even though it was His choice. He decided that long before you were ever born.
So tell us, in Islam, you're saying a person does not have free will?
No, there's no free will in Islam, because they take the idea that God is all powerful to its limit. God is omnipotent, that all power belongs to God. So God causes everything. And it says right in the Quran, it's like, if you're a believer, it's because God wants you to be a believer. And if you're not a believer, it's because God doesn't want you to be a believer, but He's going to send you to hell even so. You're going to get punished for something that's completely beyond your control. And you can't criticize God for that, because God is wiser and more powerful than you, and He's going to just smite you big time if you complain about it.
So the idea of predetermination, I guess that's in Islam then.
Presumably, yeah. There's some of that in like Calvinism too. Like some Christians believe in predetermination also.
So all of the actions you take in Islam is because it's predetermined, because Allah decided you're going to take all those actions for the rest of your life.
Yeah, all power is with Allah.
So I can see why they destroyed Buddhism out of India around 1200 AD. They just came in and killed the Buddhist monks.
Yeah, well, they considered the Buddhists to be like idolaters, and so they were just stamping out idolatry in India, or trying to anyhow. So yeah, it's kind of too bad that God is such a strange concept, because everyone has like a somewhat different idea of what God is, and ultimately it's just foolish to insist that your idea of God is the correct idea, because it's sort of like a frog understanding a human. It's like you can't understand something that's infinitely higher than you. But people think that they can understand God, and they think they know what God wants and doesn't want just because some book says so.
Yeah, so this Christian God and Muslim God has been a real negative thing, killing millions of people in human history. It's been a really negative thing, this capital G God.
Yeah, the belief in it.
The belief in it, yeah.
And unfortunately, it's like Neoplatonism came relatively close to becoming the Western like state religion in the Roman Empire. Like the Emperor Julian the Apostate, the last pagan emperor of Rome, he was trying to kind of convert Rome to a kind of Neoplatonism.
I wish he did. I think that would have been better.
Yeah, but then he wound up getting killed in a war with Persia after he'd only been emperor for a couple of years, and then his successor was a Christian, and it was all Christian after that.
Oh, gee.
Yeah, it's too bad, really.
Things could have gone quite differently.
It's like going with the philosophy of Plotinus, who was like one of the main Neoplatonist philosophers. It's similar to like Vedanta, where you've got the good, it's like the ultimate reality, and they'll still say that it exists. So it's like one step below Buddhist philosophy, where in Buddhist philosophy you just don't go there because it's completely off the scale. You don't reify it. But then below the good, you've got sort of like the demiurge. It's sort of like, it's still eternal kind of, but it's sort of like Maya. It's sort of the generator of samsara. And then below that, you've got all these 10,000 things and so forth. So, it was paganistic in that, it still kind of accepted the existence of the Greco-Roman gods and goddesses, but it was sort of like in Buddhism, where they're not really running the show. They're just more advanced than we are, but still they're below, the highest reality. And then the highest reality, it doesn't make any decisions. It doesn't have any preferences. Like the most sophisticated idea of a capital G God is just all is permitted. It's this like God doesn't reward the good or punish the bad or really care about prayers or anything like that. It's just like infinite consciousness, infinite formless consciousness from which everything else arises. But
Yeah,
Buddhism takes it even one step further and doesn't bother to reify it, which is another reason why Buddhism really has no self. There's the concept of anatta, or no self, or no soul, because it's like when you're getting to the ultimate level, you can't say that it exists or doesn't exist. It's just so completely off the scale that your mind cannot wrap around it. You can't grasp it. And so the best thing you can do is just practice dharma until you become enlightened, and then you just know the truth without having to come up with theories about it.
yeah, we don't need to put words to it or define it.
Yeah, because words don't work.
Yeah,
Words are just symbols.
you can't know the universe by thinking about it, like that line of
Yeah,
yours.
you can't know the highest truth. You can't know ultimate reality intellectually by thinking about it, or
Yeah.
emotionally either, for that matter.
I like your dog. He's been in the corner there. It's very cute.
Which one? I think
On
all
the-
three of them are back there. See,
Yeah,
right there, all three of
there he
them.
is. Oh, there's the little one. Two little.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I was looking at the bigger one. You got three of them. They're very cute.
Yeah.
I think they'd be good for your ratings. So I utilize my cat for my ratings. So it's good to have your dog there.
Yeah, every once in a while they'll make a cameo appearance on my
There he
video.
is. I see him now. Yeah, he's sticking his head
Yeah.
up. So I
Yeah.
guess in summation, I don't believe in a personal God. You don't, and the Buddha didn't believe in a capital G personal God judging our souls.
No, I mean, in Buddhism there is like an ultimate reality, but I mean, as a general rule, you just don't talk about it because words just kind of mess it up, and I mean, it doesn't do it any justice at all, and it just leads you astray, because then you start clinging to these beliefs instead of just transcending, going beyond the beliefs and just going into direct knowledge.
Yeah, look how Islam clings to the belief of Allah and all the violence it's caused, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, it
and
didn't help that Muhammad himself was like a warlord who, had
yeah,
people beheaded and women and children sold into slavery, and like raping women after battles and all this kind of stuff.
yeah.
And he's considered to be the ideal man. So, yeah, that's kind of difficult. That was Islam, I think, like theologically, religiously, was kind of a step backwards
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
like Western civilization.
Yeah. Yeah. And also our ultimate reality doesn't judge your soul, but you say the law of karma, or karma decides where we go after we die.
Yeah. But even like in the Old Testament, you can kind of see, like in the Bible itself, you can see like the evolution of God from like this crude kind of war god, of like a paganistic war god who wants bloody animal sacrifices. And then even then, I mean, you weren't supposed to say his name. So it's like even to a lot of the ancient Hebrews, God, I mean, he's supposed to not have a name. He doesn't have a face. He shows his behind to, what was it? Was it Elijah? I think it was the prophet Elijah, where God allows Elijah to see his backside, but won't show him his face, because, of course, even at that primitive level of theology, they're coming up with the idea that the true God doesn't have a face. He has a face that humans can't see, and a name that you're not. I mean, it's sort of, the name is sort of quasi forbidden or taboo. It's like you can't really pin it down. You shouldn't think that you understand God by thinking about it and using words or seeing images or anything like that, because it's just totally beyond that. So
What
even
about Yahweh? That came up with Yahweh as a name, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, originally like the Judeo-Christian god was El, who was like a Canaanite king of gods. And the name El is still found in lots of names like Israel, Michael, Bethel. There's El is still in there. And then around the time of Moses, assuming that Moses really existed, he conflated this Edomite or Midianite war god Yahweh with El. So El and Yahweh kind of joined together they got combined into one god. And then like his female consort and stuff eventually got edited out, and he became the only god.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow. So God evolved in the Old Testament, and then in the New Testament, I guess he evolved further.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. God was a bit more sophisticated by New Testament times, although he still got pissed off and like would smite people and that kind of thing.
So God changes, God evolves over the
Yeah,
centuries.
God. Yeah, but still, I mean, when you get to like the Bible, still you have a God that's like essentially a superpowered man who has preferences. He likes this and he hates that, and he wants us to do this, and he'll punish us if we don't do it, and that kind of stuff, which is still fairly primitive.
It's got a temper too. God's got a bad temper.
Yeah, and you think that if God really is all wise, that he's not going to get pissed off. You know, everything's going to happen the way it's supposed to happen, and so he's not going to be getting pissed off when people don't do what he tells them to do and that kind of thing. I mean, if he's got infinite wisdom, he's going to know in advance that they're not going to do what he tells them to do. And so then the Christians have to bring in the idea of free will, and it's just it's just not a good system. And so that any Christian who really gets advanced just in his spiritual practice, to some degree, he's got to do it in spite of the religion as much as because of it.
Yeah, I think of St. John of the Cross, these great Catholics and great Christians, in spite of the
Yeah.
religion, they became quite enlightened.
Yeah, and St. John of the Cross was being persecuted by the Inquisition. He almost died in a prison just for having like wrong view, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, so it shows like the Christian religion and the others are there to prevent people from having spiritual realization. They persecute people with spiritual realization.
Well, once you get into the religious mindset, the fanatical mindset, then it's, our point of view is the only correct point of view. And it's a way of like controlling the people, sort of like the way leftist politics is and globalist politics is working in the West too, has become like the new religion, and heretics are persecuted and destroyed if possible, if they can get away with it.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess we've covered God. Anything else, pannobhasa? Appreciate the talk.
I don't know. We could just keep meandering and yammering and stuff, but I guess we've covered the issue.
Yeah, I guess we can
After
wrap it
like
up here.
30 seconds after you turn it off, I'll remember something important that I should have said, but didn't.
Well, we've got 438 videos. We can always do another one in the future.
No, we're up to like 6 grillion at this point.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, pannobhasa. Appreciate your words of knowledge and wisdom.
Yeah, you're welcome.